In today's video, I'm going to discuss some truly terrifying diseases, and I'm going to explain to you exactly what they are and how they will slowly kill you. If that's not exciting, then I don't know what is. One thing I'll say right off the bat is that these are not the deadliest diseases. These don't have the highest death tolls. The qualification for this video was just diseases that I thought had rather scary effects, and I think you guys will agree. And by the way, this video gets more terrifying as the video progresses. Now let's get into it. First on our list, we have aquagenic urticaria, which can simply be described as an allergy to water. Yeah, you heard me right. The one thing that sustains all life on the entire planet. Yeah, there are some people that are allergic to that, and it has some pretty severe effects. Just imagine you're drinking a glass of water, and with every gulp, you slowly feel the water go down your esophagus, and behind it, your esophagus starts to blister and burn as if it's irritated. For some people, that is a reality. People that are affected by this disease don't only feel the effects when they consume water, it is also anytime they're in contact with water, making daily life a struggle. Bathing, showering, even sweating and crying can cause a severe allergic reaction. And like any allergic reaction, this reaction can be life-threatening. And direct contact with water is most often compared to being stung by a nettle plant, which if you've experienced is not pleasant at all. Besides the fact that there is no cure at this time and that there is only treatments available, one of the scariest things about this disease is that we're not even sure why it happens or what causes it. For me, one of the scariest parts of this disease is the fact that your life is so significantly changed. Anything to do with water, which is most of life, is now a chore and to be avoided. That means showers, the rain, any potential exposure to water could be life-threatening or at the very least extremely annoying and cover your body in hives. Like I mentioned earlier, the video only gets more terrifying as the list progresses, so this is definitely the most tame condition on the list, and due to the nature of this disease being lifelong, not fully understood, and also so easily triggered and so severe in nature, it definitely makes it terrifying, at least for me. But with that being said, let's move on to our next entry. This next disease is extremely rare, only 700 cases worldwide, over half of them being in the US, and it is also extremely heartbreaking. This disease I'm talking about is Fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva, or FOP for short. This disease is also known as the statue disease, because it slowly turns people into statues by turning their muscle and ligaments into bone. FOP is a rare musculoskeletal condition where at birth and progressively through life, muscles and tendons are gradually transformed into solid bone, slowly but surely making movement impossible. The average life expectancy with someone with FOP is early adulthood, and most people affected by FOP are completely immobile by age 30. Something that's interesting about FOP is that the most common cause of death is respiratory infection, meaning that FOP itself isn't typically the cause of death, although it plays a significant role. I don't think I necessarily need to go into detail on why this is such a terrifying disease, but in case you're not yet sold, let me paint a picture for you. Just imagine going through life knowing that slowly your entire ability to move and live is going to be limited, and every day you wake up, you may start to notice bone forming somewhere new in your body. Imagine by the age of 18, your jaw is fused shut and eating is a challenge, and your leg is fused solid straight and it's hard to walk, and your arms are fused straight down and you can barely use your arms and not move them at all. This disease is extremely unfortunate, and luckily it is rare, but for those who suffer from it, I do genuinely have the most sympathy for. This disease slowly takes your life from you and you become trapped within your own body, and you literally do become a human statue. To me, this is extremely terrifying and also upsetting. Oh, and in case we haven't shown one on screen yet, this is what the skeleton of someone with FOP looks like. Terrifying. Now let's move on. Next up, we have a disease that's similar in nature. It is progressive and slowly takes away your abilities, but in a very different way. This disease affects you mentally and not physically. This disease I'm talking about is Alzheimer's. This disease is likely the most common on this list, and for some people will strike a personal note. For me personally, I lost a family member to Alzheimer's disease, and the progression of it was terrifying and extremely heartbreaking to watch. And if you've dealt with or are currently dealing with somebody with Alzheimer's, I understand how you feel. Alzheimer's disease is a brain disorder that slowly destroys your memory and thinking skills. Eventually, the ability to carry out even the most simple of tasks are impossible, and slowly this disease kills you. Something that I was kind of surprised to learn is that Alzheimer's disease is still relatively poorly understood. I don't know why, but I just thought we kind of knew more about it. And that includes the causes. And although there are many environmental and genetic risk factors associated with this development, nothing is necessarily pinpointed as a cause. Other factors could include, though, head injury, clinical depression, and even high blood pressure. Something scary about the early symptoms of Alzheimer's disease is that because it appears later in life, a lot of the initial symptoms are simply written off as stress or simply natural aging, which typically isn't always the case. Some of these early symptoms include memory loss, problems with language, disorientation, and mood swings. Alzheimer's can typically only be diagnosed through pre-existing symptoms and also cognitive testing after ruling out any other sort of possibility. I can only imagine being that person in that situation where you start to feel off, things start to feel funny, you're not quite sure if you're just getting old or if you have something wrong, and you're at the age where Alzheimer's is a genuine concern, and getting that news has got to be terrifying, that knowing that sooner or later your mind is going to be gone. This has to be heartbreaking, scary, and also frustrating, knowing that you know you could do this and you want to do this, but your brain is simply not allowing you because it is slowly deteriorating. Literally, the brain of somebody with Alzheimer's is completely different. This is a side-by-side of a normal brain and a brain with Alzheimer's. There's a significant lack of white and gray matter, causing the horrible affliction. I think most of you get the idea and would probably agree that Alzheimer's disease is extremely terrifying and extremely terrible. Next up, let's discuss ebolavirus disease, or EVD. Ebolavirus disease is obviously caused by the Ebola virus, and the Ebola virus actually has 5 species of it, making this topic a little bit more complex than the scope of this video. So for the most part, I'll be speaking in general terms. The Ebola virus I'll be speaking on specifically is ZEBO-V, a certain species of the Ebola virus that is the most deadly and the most responsible for the most amount of outbreaks. But for the point of this video, I'm not too focused on the virus itself, as I'm focused on the disease it causes and the effects of that disease. The early stages of Ebola virus disease has a very common set of symptoms, such as fever, nausea, vomiting, fatigue, but slowly progresses into more serious symptoms, such as failure of the blood vessels, causing under the skin bleeding through your mucous membranes, which, if you've heard of Ebola virus before, you've probably heard of bleeding from your eyes, and that's where that comes from. The Ebola virus is spread through direct contact, and the onset of the disease can take from 2 days all the way up to 3 weeks post-exposure, meaning that you might have it and not know for a long time. But if under the skin bleeding wasn't terrifying enough for you, how does an up to 90% fatality rate sound? Or how does no cure sound? Or any sort of preventative medicine? That's right, the only treatment for Ebola virus disease is supportive care. I'm doing air quotes there, because you basically just have to let your body work its way through it and hope that you have the proper supportive care to survive. This may seem like a relatively simple disease, but it is not, and it is extremely scary and definitely painful and excruciating and scary if you ask me. So why did I put Ebola virus disease above the other entries on this list? Well, for me, I think it's extremely scary how easily this could be contracted, and how in a matter of only a few days, your life can change drastically, and you can go from exploring, trying out new places, to being in a hospital bed, fighting for your life, bleeding from your eyes, and hoping to God that you make it through it. Most of the other entries on this list have been lifelong conditions or only happen to you later in life. Ebola virus disease can happen to anyone at any time, which to me is definitely terrifying. But we still have 2 more terrifying diseases to cover. Next up, we have something that you've probably been waiting for, or at least probably had on your mind when you read the title of this video, that being rabies. I think rabies is something we've all heard about while we were younger, either in the news or pop culture, but I don't think most of us understand the true extent of how deadly and how scary and honestly terrifying this disease is. Rabies is an infectious disease, and when you start showing symptoms, you have a roughly 100% fatality rate. These symptoms include fever, extreme aversion to water, confusion, excessive salivation secretion, hallucinations, disturbed sleep, paralysis, coma, hyperactivity, headache, nausea, vomiting, anxiety. A very brutal list of symptoms, worst of which being, as soon as you experience these symptoms, you know that the end is near. Seriously, less than 10 people ever have had symptoms of rabies and survived. And as you probably assumed, there is absolutely no cure. However, fortunately, there is prevention, specifically the rabies vaccine, which is the biggest reason why this hasn't killed all of humans, because yeah, it's pretty serious. Another terrifying fact about rabies is that the onset period is huge, which is honestly terrifying, but also fortunate. If you do something to give you rabies, let's say you get bit by an animal with rabies, you have 2 to 3 months until you would potentially start to display symptoms, meaning that within that 2 to 3 month window, you have the ability to get vaccinated. And although it is only a preventative measure, it still would help prevent the onset of the symptoms, meaning that you would be likely to survive. So for that reason, the long incubation window is fortunate. But on the other hand, let's say you were bit by an animal and you didn't know it had rabies. Because you had no immediate side effects, you would imagine everything is fine. And then imagine 2 to 3 months later, you're just all of a sudden extremely scared of water, extremely confused, and salivating all over the place. These sudden, strong symptoms would be terrifying terrifying, and then being informed that you have rabies and will soon die must be unbelievably terrifying. Rabies is a cruel and painful death, and I wouldn't wish it on anybody, and for that reason I had to put it high up on this list. And for the final entry on this list, we have a disease that is likely one of the most infamous diseases of all time. This is a disease that killed anywhere from 25 to 60% of Europe during the 14th century, with an estimated death toll of over 50 million. I'm talking about the bubonic plague. Also, before we even get into it, did you guys know that the bubonic plague is still around? There is still hundreds of cases every year of the bubonic plague. Pretty crazy. And the disease is still just as serious, it's just nowhere near as common as it once was. The bubonic plague is spread through the bite of infected fleas and only takes a few days to fully onset. The symptoms include headache, fever, vomiting, and most importantly, swollen lymph nodes. We'll get into that in a second. Without treatment, the plague results in a 30 to 90% fatality rate in those infected, and death occurs quickly in only a matter of 10 days. Fortunately though, with treatment, the fatality rate only drops to about 10%, which is still scary, but not nearly as scary as up to 90%. Why the bubonic plague is called the bubonic plague is because the virus causes swelling in the lymph nodes. Like I said earlier, these swollen lymph nodes are called buboes, and during your infection could explode. They're basically just big, painful lumps under your skin, and honestly, buboes is way too cute of a name to be given to something so gross and deadly. But yeah, the bubonic plague is pretty well known, and I feel like I don't need to go too deep into detail on it besides what I already mentioned. It's gross, it's deadly. Luckily, you can likely survive it today, and it's pretty rare, but at one time it was the biggest, scariest thing around. So for that reason, I figured it deserved a spot on here. And ladies and gentlemen, that's all for this video. I know this video is kind of a bummer and definitely creepy, but one thing to remember is if you are not experiencing any of these diseases, which I'm assuming you're not, then you should be grateful. Be thankful for your health because it's really all we have at the end of the day. Take care of your body, eat well, exercise, and make sure you take proper precautions when doing things that could lead to disease or while doing anything dangerous in general. Just be smart, be safe, and take care of yourself, and be grateful for every day that you're healthy. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Trust me, bro.